What if you can't use a big, huge loaf of sourdough fast enough and it goes bad? Make a small loaf. Look at how cute these are. I would say that they are the size, well, you can see what it looks like next to the regular Banneton. This is a 450-gram loaf, and it's a great size for like a bread bowl for soup. Or if there's just one or two of you at your house, make one of these mini loaves. It is so perfect for just a few slices, and you don't have to be overwhelmed by having too much sourdough bread around. So what I do is I take my bowl of sourdough dough out of the fridge, and I love to make a big batch of dough every week, and then I can just pull out the amount that I need whenever I want to bake. So today what we're going to do is take out 450 grams. If you set your bowl on the scale before you turn your scale on, it will automatically zero it out. But let's say you didn't set it on before you turned the scale on, no problem. Just hit the tare button. That wipes out all of the weight of the bowl, everything that's in the bowl, and then as you pull dough out of the bowl, you can see exactly how much you're pulling out, and you want to just take out enough until it reads negative 450. This is the easy way that I figure out how much dough I'm taking out of my bowl. And yes, I make this dough. It sits in the fridge all week long. I bake stuff from it whenever we want. And I will put the link to that recipe, all of the details on how to make the dough. I'm going to put that in the description below. Before we start working with our ball of dough, I like to put a little bit of water on the counter. You can see I've been doing a lot of baking today, so there's already a little bit of flour on my counter, but I don't use flour when I'm shaping our sourdough loaves. I use water instead because I don't want to incorporate any new flour into the dough at this point. All of the flour that's currently in the dough, the sourdough yeast, that wild yeast, has had a chance to do its work and its magic on it, and it's going to help it to rise. If you add more flour into your dough right now, it will change the texture. It will actually make the crust a little bit more tough. So what we're going to use for this little tiny loaf to proof it, instead of using the big Banneton basket where it just really wouldn't hold its shape, I'm using one of our everyday cereal bowls, and I'm rubbing it with butter. That's the trick for having soft crust. Instead of making a small loaf with really thick hard crust, put butter inside your bowl, and that is going to make sure that your dough does not stick to it while it's proofing. Now let's shape that cute little loaf. And this is going to be just the same techniques that you would do if you were doing a larger loaf. Flip your ball of dough over so that the top is now on that nicely wet counter. Push it out with your fingers so it's a little bit like a rough rectangle, and then you're going to start sewing it side to side to side, tucking in the top, and then squeeze it and roll it up. Don't be shy as you're creating the tension. You want all of that dough to be as stuck together as possible. Then pop it into your nicely buttered bowl and cover it well, and you're going to put it in your fridge to proof for 2 hours before you bake it. I like to cold proof all of our dough and the loaves once they are shaped because it actually gives you better texture, better rise, better crust. But if you don't have time to let it cold proof for 2 hours, let it proof on your counter for 1 hour. But don't forget this final bit of tension creating. When you get ready to tip that dough out onto your parchment paper, make sure before you do it, you work your way around the bowl, tucking in those edges. That final bit of tension creating is super important. It's going to give you the best rise once this hits the oven. One small backtrack, make sure before you're doing this step that your oven and your Dutch oven have preheated to 450 degrees. I like to put my Dutch oven into our oven, turn the oven on to bake 450, and let them preheat together. Then once they have preheated, then I do this final bit of tension, tip it out onto the parchment, and do a really nice deep score. Now you can do another design on the side if you want, but you'll see later the other designs will not show up very well because there's no flour on the outside of this loaf that creates that contrast, which is why you can see the designs on the typical loaves that proof in a floured Banneton basket. But make sure you give it at least one good score. That's gonna allow it to rise better. It's gonna allow the moisture to escape from that loaf while it's baking. Then pop this into your very screaming hot Dutch oven, and you're gonna bake it with the lid on for 20 minutes. It actually takes about the same amount of time for a small loaf to bake as it does for a larger 900-gram loaf, which I know seems kind of crazy, but this is where you're gonna want to play with your oven. Allow the loaf to bake at 450 with the lid on for 20 minutes. When you hit that 20-minute mark, if it is still very, very pale, leave the lid on for 5 more minutes before you remove it. Then, once you remove the lid, allow it to bake for another 15 minutes and then check the internal temperature. You want to make sure that that internal temperature, right in the middle of the loaf, is hitting 200 degrees. If it's rising really fast to 200, then you know that your loaf is done. Here's what my loaf looks like when I take the lid off at that 20 to 25-minute mark. Check yours. You have permission. I give you permission. If you feel like it looks so pale, leave the lid on 5 more minutes and then do the last little baking for 10 minutes and check the temperature. Once it hits 200 degrees, take it out and let it rest on a cooling rack. You don't want to cut your loaves until they have had a chance to cool for at least 30 minutes at the shortest amount of time. I like to give them at least an hour or really until I can barely feel any heat coming from the loaf. That allows it to finish baking and for the moisture to escape completely, which makes it so that your loaf in the middle will not be gummy and doughy. Now, whether you're making this for bread bowls or you just don't want to have a huge loaf of bread around, you are ready to make the cutest, most petite little sourdough loaf. Okay, you got to see what it looks like inside, right? I love the way it bakes up when you use butter in that bowl. It does really change the texture and how thick the crust is. You'll see once I cut into it how nice and thin that crust is. Still a little bit crackly, but not tough. It had great rise. And guess what? This dough was in my fridge for over a week. I'm putting the list to our whole sourdough playlist below, plus the link to the recipe for the dough that I used to make this bread, and we're here cheering you on. If you have questions, if you're struggling with your sourdough, put your questions below.